Hi, Adrien. Welcome back. So good to see you again.
Likewise, Tarun. Nice to be here.
Thank you. So today we are going to talk about flow state for an athlete. Can you, from your experience as an ex-NHL hockey player and now a coach, could you talk a little bit about, according to you, what is flow state? And then perhaps give us a couple of examples of how you experienced flow state when you were playing, and maybe was there an instance where you did not experience it? Do you remember something specifically?
Definitely, I can. Well, let's start what flow state and there's a lot of science around it and what ends up happening. I'd like to talk about experience because when you experience flow state, it becomes something real. It's not something you just read about. And obviously, athletes, musicians, those that often have to perform, on a certain stage, they get into because there's a certain challenge to the activity, and so you have to be fully involved and immersed in it. So that's what I would say flow state is. It's a full and you feel immersed in what you're doing. So this sense of self disappears and your relationship to time, the times where I was in flow state, I definitely felt like I lost track of time. And I think I think as a kid, for sure, I experienced that a lot, especially going out when I skated on the outdoor rinks for, 4 or 5 hours at a time, where I lost track of time completely. And in one instant, there's one instant that I recall playing in Vancouver where I think at the end of the game, I think I had three points, 4 points at the NHL level. And I remember clearly is uh, seeing the plays beforehand. So it was like the options, the next pass, the next play was being sort of revealed, or I wasn't even thinking about what I need to do. I just sort of instinctively, reacted. In one play, I recall Igor Larionov mentioning this was a world-class play that I made, and I felt so good about it. Was a pass that went from east to west, so meaning the width of the ice the ice where I had a pass from Jeff Cordnall. He put it on my stick, and I had to reach out to get it, and then I just without even holding on to it, it was right off my stick. I put it back against the grain, back to the middle to through the legs of the opponent, and the goalie had committed to me to a my teammate who had an open net. And it looked so easy, and it was, I almost went, where did that come from? So you're definitely accessing another level of potential when you get into flow state. So creativity just all of a sudden goes up. You see things that you wouldn't usually see. So I was even a little bit, I guess, surprised at that play. But during the game, I wasn't really thinking about it. But this, I recall this game vividly, how immersed, how involved I was. Like it's like I was, that like that little kid playing on the pond where I just lost track of time. And 20,000 people are there watching, but my focus was just a deep involvement in what I was doing, without any concern of, anything else, but simply the activity at hand.
Interesting. And do you recall any instance where you were not particularly in a state of flow that you remember?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, often I think there was, on the other side is, um, I recall one instant in the final, of in Switzerland, Zurich. We hadn't won a championship, so there was, at 39 years, Zurich had gone for a dry spell and hadn't won a championship. And we played Lugano, and it was game 6 at home. We had the opportunity to win. And I remember even the night before, I couldn't sleep. So the mind was way, way too active, sort of thinking about, you know, what are the scenarios, the future scenarios. Often when we worry, it's because we're thinking about future scenarios. But I went into that game, I recall, carrying a lot of anxiety, being really anxious, and performance anxiety. But usually, often it would go away, But in this moment, it's like I couldn't rid myself of it. So I played, the whole game with resistance, with that inner resistance which you feel. So it's like you're going, against the grain, or you go against the stream. And I remember I didn't want my mind to be, I wanted to take control of my mind somewhat, because the mind tends to be overly active when there's a lot of resistance in the body. And I just kept repeating a mantra. I said, I have to make a difference. So I went back to the bench every time. I have to make a difference. I ended up scoring the championship winning goal, but the game was, felt, it was like torture, because I was fighting myself throughout the game. And I think that is really the opposite, is you're the barrier sort of to your performance, because the mind is overly active. So often we hear getting in your own way. Well, getting in your own way simply means your personal self is too involved in what's going on in the activity. And so it becomes a sort of barrier, because there's a cost perhaps to, losing the game, making a mistake. And that ultimately cannot be what you focus on when, you're playing at the end of the game. At the end of the day, it's simply, there's a game, there's a game being played. And uh, for for anyone to, perform at the best, there's got to be a sort of a withdrawal, a removal from the personal self. And whatever can happen, because any scenario, anything can happen in that game. So that I remember vividly, how much of a struggle that was. And when I scored the championship winning goal, there was 10 seconds left in the game. There was a relief. Like, honestly, I felt like all this, tension I was carrying in my body just dropped off. But then I had to stay 10 seconds on the ice, and I go, okay, 10 seconds, okay. Um, but that was the experience. And it was a really interesting experience, because I was fighting myself. And if any athletes can relate to that, I'm sure they can. You're fighting yourself in that game. And so, the performance, the activity becomes, one that, is, you're pushing through it. You're trying to get by. So that experience vividly stayed with me because there was obviously it was a big moment and there was a lot at stake.
Yeah, and when you spoke about the first experience, I think what you're saying is the east to west pass and whatever that happened, you were so immersed in the activity, correct me if I'm wrong, there was no thought of winning the game or not winning the game. Is it
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There was, simply the activity. In this instant, I was playing the game and there was a love, a deep, like, wow, this is feels so good. It feels so right. And it, why I fell in love with hockey, because it felt so right when I went on the outdoor rinks. I would lose myself in playing hockey. And Sunday mornings, when I was there at 5:30 for 6:30 practice and I skated around, I was like in my imaginary world. I just skated around and just loved being out there. So the senses are totally present, when you're in that state. Let me ask you, how does the contemplate system, how does that support and cultivate the flow state?
so? As you know, contemplate is based on the premise that an athlete is a human being first, then a human being plus an athlete for only a few years, and continues to be a human being for many, many years. So the contemplate system works on both the aspects, the human being aspect of the athlete and the athlete aspect of the athlete. For the human being aspect, you go through a core mental fitness program where you learn the practice of contemplation, you learn some mental fitness principles, and you do some work in your decision making journal, etc. And the sports mental fitness program is where you learn everything from managing stress, performance, anxiety, resilience, emotional regulation, peripheral vision, also flow state. There is a module on flow state, meditation, visualization, and many other aspects. But think about it this way: you start working on the core mental fitness program first. Let's say that is at least about 8 weeks. In addition, you also start on the sports mental fitness program, depending upon your schedule, depending upon your coach, how they want to do things. You may either do the core program first and then the sports program, or you could do both in parallel, depending upon how the coach deems fit. But look at the structure. There is a good 8 weeks worth of work that you're doing in the core program. And then, even in the sports module, the flow state module is probably the sixth module, the seventh module, somewhere there. It's not the first module. So, visually, it may look like, oh, I need to do all of this and then I'm going to do something to achieve my state of flow. But that's not how it works. You start working on your flow state from the first day itself. Even in the core mental fitness program, when you're working on understanding the voices in your head, what choices do I make? Which are the wrong choices that make me less peaceful? Which are the right choices that make me more peaceful? When you're working on not negatively comparing yourself with others because it makes you less peaceful. when you're choosing between what feels good in the moment versus what feels peaceful in the long run. All of these exercises may never mention a phrase called flow state. But in essence, what are you doing? You are removing the barriers from flow state. The barriers that exist because of which you can't get into a flow state. You're removing those barriers. Those are the barriers that make you more restless, that make you more stressed. You're removing those barriers. When you go into the sports module, you're specifically focusing on exercises on stress, performance, image stress. My coach's expectations can create a stress. My family expectations can create a stress. All of those are barriers to you getting into a flow state. What we just discussed, winning, you, you just said, and that moment you're not thinking about winning the game, winning the championship, that thought disappears. In the contemplate system, winning is positioned in a very different light. Winning comes from maximizing your potential. Maximizing your potential comes from constant improvement. And constant improvement comes from falling in love with the process of constant improvement. So we focus on training an athlete not to win. We focus on training them to only fall in love with the process of constant improvement. And now you see what you just said is directly linked to this training. If you can only focus on that moment of what am I doing? What am I playing? How am I feeling when I'm playing? Am I improving constantly? Then that whole thought of winning just completely disappears. And what is winning really? As a hockey team, as a football team, as a basketball team, winning is simply our maximized potential being larger than your maximized potential. That's all. That's all. So if you were to drill it down to the essence, and every player is only working on falling in love with the process of constant improvement, winning will take care of itself. Because the goal is to transcend winning, not to focus on it. That is our
Sure.
contemplate system.
Mm. That's really well said. It's almost like, the winning losing, the paradigm of being, you know, competitive. If you win, it means that you're happy. But that's a box we created, that ultimately limits us. And I think what I'd like to bring up this point really is Paul Maurice, the coach of the Florida Panthers. They won the Stanley Cup this past year recently, and really interesting what he said. He said when his team is on, he knows it. It's like he's describing the flow state, that everybody's in flow state, and in a team game there's this collective synergy, where players are reading off each other, so they're in the right position for the next pass, and then they're just working as a unit. And he says that what ends up happening is time slows down. And we were taught, okay, he talked about the final game. We're taught to go, okay, I have to get through to the finish line to win. But he goes, we said, let's enjoy the moment. That was their mantra, is to, like, let's savor this, because we know we're on, we know we're in that flow state. So in some ways they were trying to get there because they know it feels so right. They know when they're on, so it's more than just drawing lines and saying you have to be here, you have to be here. It's sort of this energetic connection they have where they're reading off each other, and everything just kind of flows. One event or one play, follows the other in a very precise way. So there's order versus when you're not in flow, it seems more chaotic. And he talked about that, and I thought that was so beautifully shared. It's like let's enjoy this moment. So, and they just recently won the Stanley Cup. Interesting that you know he shared that as a coach. So, and as a coach, I think he just sort of removed himself because you're no longer, you don't need to have, it's sort of a removal. You're part of, you're doing your thing, but there's less involvement. There's you're doing your job as a coach where you're sending the next line out, perhaps seeing small little details, but there's sort of less involvement because everybody's doing their part. So, and I have to say, like that, being in flow state, it's such a great feeling. It just feels, like you're in harmony with what you're doing. And that's another way I would describe it.
You, we spoke about winning, losing, and putting that in a box. So tell me about those two games you mentioned, the East to West pass, the magical game. Did you win that game or did you lose it?
I'm pretty sure we won, but I wasn't really aware of it. Totally wasn't aware, but I'm pretty sure because I think I had a 3 point night. 3 point night means, I had, I think, maybe one, two assists or so, I remember being very productive. I'm
You,
guessing the game ended. Yeah.
that's the point.
I,
The game
yeah,
you won, the championship game that you won, you were completely stressed.
totally stressed.
You did not enjoy a minute of it, kind of a thing. Versus the other game, interestingly enough, you don't even remember if you won or lost. What you do remember is how it made you feel.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that is what speaks to what should be more important in the pursuit of excellence in sports. Winning plus well being, performance plus peace of mind, an athlete
And
plus a human being.
yes, and what I think is great is we want the other team to play at their best. We want to give, people who came to the game, like when a game is in flow, both teams are, in the game, fully immersed. There's a sort of back and forth, like it's beautiful to watch. You can see that when there's a game where both teams are performing at their highest. That's what we should aspire, and we want our opponent to be at their best because this challenges us to grow and to be better. So I think, this mentality, win at all cost, I mean, winning is a byproduct of a lot of things. So it's a byproduct of, training, improving your skills, and then being fully immersed in the moment, being able to deliver those skills. And it's all about decision making, and that will take care of itself as work on your skills and remove the barriers. You talked about removing the barriers. I think most of the time the barriers are like the personal self, too much involvement of the ego in what you're doing. So there's a cost. What if things don't go right? What if I make a mistake? What if I embarrass myself in front of 20,000 people? What if I let my teammates down? All that, you know, and the mind, that's the beliefs or the sort of paradigm or the conditioning that's being played out. And I think what I've learned and I would do differently is I wouldn't give so much attention to that when the resistance shows up, when when the monkey mind is more active is, can I get beyond that? Can I no longer, you say the good and the bad wolf, which one are you going to feed? Well, if you're, giving too much attention and feeding into that, you're just, reinforcing that, you're keeping it, you're solidifying even more. So it's to go beyond. Can you, what do they say? The mind's a good servant. So the mind, yeah, might have all kinds of things and conditioning and past experiences, and that's sort of stored, but you still get to choose where you put your energy. I can decide, okay, there's resistance, but am I going to focus on that? So I think the flow exercise is really about being able to focus, bring your focus and attention on where you want it to go, even though the conditions might not be optimal. And that's really a skill that I would cultivate more and more, so it becomes something where you can bring your attention exactly where you want it. We have this ability to do that, and I know when I struggled, I didn't. My energy, everything, my thoughts, me, my sense of being was being pulled in the direction of like the negative thoughts of what can go wrong. And so the practice is really about, shifting and directing, even though perhaps there's resistance, perhaps uh, perhaps you're not at your best, you're still able attention in on a specific things because you've trained it, because you've trained your mind enough that you're sort of going beyond the conditions. And I think that's something that we don't train. I've never been taught that, and no, but we have this ability. So, and I think you're also diminishing the resistance by not feeding into it as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So you also mentioned when we were talking about this a few days ago that a flow state is almost natural to a human being, but it gets lost on the way. I think that is what you
Mhm.
said. And that is exactly what we are saying. There are barriers that you have introduced because of your conditioning, because of the way the world wants you to be.
Mm.
In one of your earlier conversations, I think you spoke about how being, how showing that you're tough becomes important even though you're broken inside. And all of that is a barrier because you're being somebody you are not. And the goal is, I see this in two or three levels from a, because with Contemplate, what we really have is not philosophy, it's a training system. From a distracted state to flow state, how do you go from A to B? Not discussing how it feels or philosophically, that's all good. How do I get there? Our, our goal is to democratize getting into the flow state. It is not meant for the gifted few. You don't have to be special. Everybody should be able to do it, and there is a process to do it. Remove the barriers that makes you clearer, less restless, more peaceful, but clearer. A very cliched analogy would be of a pond. If there are ripples, you can't see the bottom, etc., etc. Remove the barriers, still the pond, and you can see through. You could consider that to be a flow state when you're able to see things deep inside of you. And as you said, execute them effortlessly because they're just coming. You're not thinking. This is not your conscious mind at work. This is just coming to you, and you're just doing it. And there is something inside of you that almost knows that this is going to work. You just know it.
Mhm.
I think
That
you hit that shot. I have a feeling you almost knew it that this is going to go through.
Well, I think what's evident, and Paul Maurice said, he just goes like, we want to savor this moment because we know we're on. And I think it's almost like you don't want the game to end because you're so immersed in it. So I remember those. It's like, oh, I wish the game could go on and on. And I think you said something important is that it's sort of innate. Uh, when we remove the barriers, where the object subject relationship becomes sort of one. It's no longer, a sort of separation. And I think kids do that naturally. If you looked at a kid, reading a book, when they start being able to read or look at pictures, they're so drawn in. There's this, they become the book, so there's this the direct experience that is, fascinating. And I think your senses are enhanced and you notice all the details. So I think we are wired to be, in flow state. Um, so obviously you can take it to the next level as an athlete, and what would be, the next level of flow. There's, all kinds of science around that, but it's a natural way.
I think it's like a state of athletic nirvana, and you
I
don't.
like the sound of that.
Again, philosophical, as I said, but philosophical is good to inspire you, but ultimately there is a process to get into it. Do the work, and all of everybody can get into it. It's a process. You just need to work on it. This was wonderful, Adrian. Thank you so much. Your experience is very valuable. I'm always amazed at the examples that you come up with from your life. Thank you so much. Very, very grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you for making me reminisce about all these moments. And yeah, it's a real pleasure.
I'll see you soon.